And here we go, and there it is, and we are live again. So hello there, folks. Once again, I apologize. Just some technical gremlins are really coming and biting us here at the unit just at the moment, what with difficulties on the website and network connectivity issues. But hopefully we'll be able to take a step back to where we were about 10 minutes ago. And we're going to begin from that point again as we explore this topic of the EU and energy, and of course the relationship with the Ukraine, etc. Now, when we got started, we moved on to the topic of nuclear energy and the implications for that. And Clive was giving us a little bit of a background about some of the lesser known aspects of the nuclear industry, and was talking about something about low base. So could you just give us that summary again about the nuclear industry and the low base and the fuel rods aspect of it, please, Clive? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. The nuclear energy industry works on a baseline where the generators are not actually varied from the national grid. They're on a base load and they go full load all the time. There is no up and down. They can run like that for 2-3 years, and nothing is done. So one of the problems is, like, people forget how to shut them down and run and start them up again because they run for so long. The control of the rods is very, very minimal, although the government would make you think otherwise. So all the slack, all the excess and energy that we need must come from other sources, and this is normally done by fossil fuels because they're very quick to react, whereas the green energy is normally weather based, and you can't obviously rely on the weather for the uptake and downtake of the power supply. So the nuclear energy is absolutely dead flat, so everything else is then regulated by the national grid by the fossil fuel and the green energy.
When you say dead flat, Clive, you mean they're on all the time, yeah?
Yes, they run day and night, day and night. If for example, one in Somerset, oh, what's it called?
Hinkley
Point. That has got 500 megawatt turbines, so that is producing 2,000 megawatts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that doesn't alter. So that is a very, very, very good baseline for our power supply, but it cannot be regulated. That is the problem with nuclear energy.
Just as a background, Clive, you were talking about control of nuclear reactors. Some people here may not realise how that's done. It's basically, I believe it's graphite rods are put into the nuclear power line.
Yes, the graphite rods are lowered and hired into the actual reactor itself, and as the rods go in, it actually reduces the amount of heat that they produce, and therefore the power reduces. But because they take such a long time to react, and because they're so inefficient, because the rods do rot as well, obviously, as they're well, rot. No, that's not the right word.
They decay, don't they? Decay.
Yes. That's the word. They're not very receptive to change, so they are always kept. Nuclear power stations are always kept at base load for that very reason.
Okay, so now that doesn't necessarily need to be problematic, though, does it? Because what
it's not problematic unless you need a change in the frequency. Then it's problematic.
How do you mean a change in the frequency, as in the AC, the alternating current frequency, which is currently 50 hertz?
Yes, the 50 hertz. To maintain that 50 hertz, you must be able to regulate up and down, obviously, which is done by normally fossil fuels, although the green energy is starting to come in now. But even the green energy, it's less than 2% of our generation power in the country.
Yeah. So now, so let's just investigate that 50 hertz for a moment then. So the 50 hertz is this cycle. It's the cycle between the line going positive and negative. Is this sinusoidal waveform. Now,
yes.
So what is it that dictates the fact that our grid is 50 hertz? Is that the speed that the turbines are being spun at from the power stations?
Yes, that's correct. To get 50 hertz, most of the turbines run at 3,000 revs. It's very
alternating current is isn't it? It goes from live to dead, live to dead.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So if
you've got three waves. You've got three waves that cut through each other, which then give you the alternating current.
Yeah.
Right. So if you alter the speed of the alternator, it then alters the sequence of time of going from positive to negative voltage.
Correct. That's correct.
Just to let people know. And of course that's going to start affecting instrumentation over here, which is set up for 50 hertz. Clocks, televisions, virtually most non-inductive loads.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, water pumps that supply our water, fuel pumps that supply our fuel, everything is dictated by the 50 megahertz. That is why the national grid controls the whole of the national grid on frequency and not on voltage and not on amperage.
Yeah, the funny thing is though that 50 hertz isn't guaranteed at a 50th of a second, is it? It just means
it is.
Yeah, but they've got to have 50 each second. They don't necessarily actually exactly equal. If you understand what I mean. Each side.
No. When you synchronize a generator to the national grid, you have to synchronize it with what we call a synchroscope, which has to be absolutely exactly. That breaker has to shut exactly at the right time, otherwise it will damage the generator.
Right. Okay.
So it is exactly 50 hertz. There's no negotiating with that. It is exactly.
So for us, we've basically got we've got this base load that is being deployed onto the grid that's generated by our nuclear power plants, which are dotted around the coast. You've got Dounreay, you've got Hinkley, you've got the one on the east coast in Kent there, and several others. We then support that. The primary support that, Dungeness, that's right. So we then support that, and the primary support for that is fossil fuels, coal and gas-fired plants, like Drac, for example, up in the northeast of England. Then we've got some alternative energies, like the hydroelectric power plant in Wales. In Llanberis in Wales, and then obviously we've got our wind turbines and so on and so forth. Everything that we've done to date, though, everything that we have done to date has always been about generating power on a macro scale, on a national scale, piping everything onto the national grid. So, for example, there is a large project in the Bristol Channel to produce, put in a tidal generator that captures the incoming and outgoing tide with this massive barrier. And again, the barrage, so this massive barrage, and again, the implication for that is to generate vast amounts of power from a huge engineering project and pour that onto the grid. But of course, before the national grid was implemented, we didn't used to do that. We used to have local power generation, via local generating stations. Many cities had their own little coal-fired generators. We generated on a city scale, independent of the grid. So we ought to be thinking about that aspect, because there are aspects of green energy that do work and are successful. Certainly, there's one that has been implemented in a mill here in Devon for the Devon Wildlife Trust, and that turbine generates quite regularly. Quite a reasonable level of power that they use locally on site. They basically don't distribute it back onto the grid, they just pour it straight in and use it there on site. So those kinds of micro scale generations are probably more appropriate from the renewable industry, and would be less costly than massive, huge investments in engineering projects. What do you think about that? What I just said, Clive?
No, I think you're completely wrong. For you, if I may say so,
Okay.
because the small amount of power that they actually produce outweighs the actual cost of the project itself, and because the electricity is so expensive because it's green, and you've got this renewable obligation certificates, which I explained earlier, makes it so expensive. That's the only way. I mean, Drax, for example, is changing from coal to biomass. You probably are aware of that.
That's right.
The only reason they're changing to biomass is because of the rocks, because they get 3 times the amount of money for the same amount of electricity.
Right. So this is this renewable obligation certificate. Now, we talked about this before, but is this an incentive from
Yes.
from Europe to basically pay the owners of Drax 3 times more for the energy that they produce because they're burning biomass instead of fossil fuel?
Correct.
Okay.
And
But
biomass is no cleaner than coal. You have to use HCl to get rid of the
residues,
emissions. You have to use lime to get rid of the acidic part of it. You've got to use carbon to get rid of the dioxins and the ferrins that cause cancer. You have to use then a baghouse, which then gets rid of the dust. You used to have this whole system to try and clean the emissions before they go up the stack into the atmosphere. That is all monitored by the Environmental Agency on a very, very strict method. And if they exceed those emissions, then they're fined very, very heavily for that.
And of course, there's the other thing as well. The cost of transporting biomass from Canada and so on is increasing the CO2.
It's absolutely madness. And the chemicals that they use, all they're doing it for is the profit. There is no real reason why they should transfer from coal to biomass, except for that particular ROC reason.
Yeah, for the profit.
Yeah.
So, well, let's just come back. Sorry, go ahead, Peter. You were going to comment.
Yeah, just a quick one. Clive, you say that nuclear energy is the base generation.
Yes.
Now, nuclear energy is cheaper than most of the other forms.
It is much cheaper, except for decommissioning and getting rid of the nuclear fuel. Apart from that, it is much cheaper.
So if that is the base generating source, why is now electricity cheaper? Because the other sources are used intermittently to top up the nuclear energy, yes?
Best ask the Energy Secretary that.
Yeah.
They're the one.
But it's always struck me as strange that, I mean, it was some ridiculously small amount compared to coal-fired or gas-fired generation.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, it's very, very small. I could say all the green energy in the country is less than 2% of what we use.
It's a joke. It's a conspiracy, isn't it? I mean, I've always said that the EU
It's an absolute, and it's so expensive. This is what puts our electricity up. This is what puts our costs up. This is why we can't. Industry pays so much, because I mean, 40%. I think it's 40% of most industries is power. So why are they costing so much? If we could have cheaper electricity, our goods could be cheaper. We could export more. It would be such a great idea.
Well, I think you can blame the EU lobbyists for that.
Without a doubt.
So we've got a comment coming in from the audience here. We've got a chap called Daniel who basically posted in response to the talk about nuclear. And what Daniel was saying was, what do we think about thorium reactors?
Oh, this is going on to fusion again, is it?
No, no, no. This is using a different fuel for the reactor. There's a reactor type called thorium.
Yeah,
Rather than uranium based, there is this reactor technology called thorium. I think that they've been trying to work with this in India and in Asia, and develop it. I wonder if have you heard anything about? Do you know anything about thorium stuff at all, Clive?
No, I really don't. No, to be truthful, all I know is uranium. Being very unstable because it's a 537, I think it is, they use. So it's a very unstable atom,
isotope,
which is why they use it. Isotope, sorry, which is why they use it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I don't know about this fuel. No, I really am not aware of that.
To change over would be horrendously costly anyway.
Yeah, and the technology doesn't seem to be proven is the other thing as well. So I'll add what I know. Some of in fact, much of this that I'm about to repeat comes from Doug Coulter when we had Doug Coulter on. We were talking about fission and fusion and all of these kinds of things. One of the things he explained about thorium was that whilst thorium gets a very good write-up on the internet, and there seems to be very positive, positive messages about it because of the way the reactor is developed. There are problems with what they call fast breeding with thorium, which is something to do with the reaction running away and being able to control that reaction. And that's the thing that they have the difficulty with, because as the isotopes change and decay, so the material inside of the reactor changes because of the diffusion of protons and neutrons from the atoms, and that means that the reaction is not easy and simple to manage. And so I think what he was saying was that whilst there seems to be a huge amount of positivity around the ideas of thorium, actually the practical implementation of it, nobody has yet been able to stop that turning into a fast breeder and running away. So I hope that answers your question, Dan.
I hope that's pretty common with all nuclear power. Actually, that is pretty sure with all of them. But I don't know about this thorium. But the uranium is obviously more stable than thorium, but it is still very, very difficult to control.
Of course, the problem that leaves us with, which has always been the issue with nuclear, is what on earth are we supposed to do with this spent fuel that is radioactive, has very long and extensive half-lives? And I mean, it's not been in the media very much, but there seems to be a huge amount of furore and information going onto the web about this disaster in Fukushima, and that seems to have got. Well, it would appear that the TEPCO have completely lost control of that.
Yes.
They've got a China syndrome in the core. I think the fuel rods fell off the roof and went into the bottom of it, and the things. It's just a mess, a complete mess.
And Chernobyl, of course.
Yes, of course. Chernobyl. It's basically been just shoved in a massive concrete sarcophagus, hasn't it?
Exactly. But we use wind scale, don't we?
Yes.
For processing this spent uranium. Exactly what they do with it, I really am not sure. But they make it safe, I think. Well, they try and make it safe, and then they dump it in the sea, don't they, in concrete?
It's a shame it's such a heavy element, uranium, because perhaps they could put it into a booster and send it towards the sun if it was a bit lighter, make it economically viable.
No, they put it in the sea or bury it deep in the earth.
Yeah. They're talking about deep mines, aren't they, and then encapsulating it in glass.
So this is the only thing with nuclear energy that makes it not very efficient. The actual decommissioning, because the decommissioning takes years and years and years and years. Which costs possibly the whole of the output that it's ever produced would probably cost that much to decommission them, and then of course you've then got the fuel to get rid of. Yes, as you say, Rich.
Yeah. My old dad was actually part of the team that built the Dungeness Peace Station back in the 60s.
Right.
But the time was then that I don't think anyone had put any deep thought into the decommissioning aspect.
No.
Surely any new reactors would have that designed into it for quick decommissioning. I mean, if they can do it with naval vessels, for instance, they can do it on a larger scale, surely.
Yes, I would have thought so.
I'm going to divert. I'm going to stay on topic of nuclear energy, but I'm going to divert the conversation just a little bit for us to come around to thinking about it from a socio-political and economic point of view. Now, there is material on our website about this particular story that I'm going to talk about, but there has been an investment consortium pulled together to invest in the Hinkley C second reactor at Hinkley C. And what that investment consortium is made up of French and Chinese investors. Now, so there is no UK government involvement and there is no UK taxpayer involvement, and I'll come back to the reasons for why that are at the moment. But essentially, all of the investment is coming from France and China to develop that and bring that on stream. When that reactor comes on stream, it's going to sell electricity to the national grid here in the UK at 3 times the current cost. And it's going to make an enormous amount of profit. Now, I can't recall straight off the top of my head what the figures are, but I'm going to throw out something in the region of 16 or 18 billion terms of net bottom line profit, and something like turnover of 72 billion over the lifespan of the reactor. But once again, the commissioning problem is not being dealt with there, so they'll probably extend the life of it. But of course, that profit that's going to come from the investment in that reactor is going to go back to the shareholder investors, which is France and China. So now the difference here is that when we had BNFL, British Nuclear Fuels, which you can read on Wikipedia, you can find out about how this, what's called the European Union's illegal state aid directive, was used to break up BNFL. Because it was seen as being a monopoly, a government-owned monopoly, and under EU treaty rules, that's illegal. That's the same reason why the Royal Bank of Scotland has been mandated to sell off all of its British branches as a result of the bailout. It's the same reason why your post office was dismantled and taken away. All of those things were done under the EU state aid directive. And what that basically says is it says that the taxpayer or the government treasury of a country cannot be involved in investing in infrastructure and cannot have involvement in infrastructure. So what's happened is you've got an asset stripping process where the asset wealth, the book asset value of these infrastructural properties that belong to UK have been basically liquidated and sold. There is no cash balance sheet to show for that because that money's actually gone into the great debt that's unfolding before us. But that's an important aspect to understand, is that the shareholders that are investing in things like Hinkley C, the Hinkley C reactor, when that comes to the end of their life, are they going to take on the problem of decommissioning it, this very difficult problem? No. What are your thoughts, gentlemen?
Well, my thoughts is that most of these were built when we had a company or private industry, public industry, sorry, called the CGB, the Central Electricity Generating Board, and these were built and paid for by the taxpayer. And then when the privatisation of the industry happened, they all then went off to I think it was Power Gen and
Centrica.
Yeah,
and
on an EDF eventually.
But the nuclear was part of the CGB. But then when it was when it privatised, they didn't sell the nuclear side of it, as you so rightly said, Rick. That then stayed in public ownership until it was got rid of, as you say, by the French or the EU.
Yeah. Well, the rules don't seem to apply to the French much anyway, do they?
They don't, do they? No. Well, they certainly don't.
So, I mean, so we can see, and I think the point that I really wanted to, that we really want to articulate to the public out there is the point that is kind of all over our website, which is that it's important for people to understand the European Union, its institutions, the laws and the directives that it enacts, and just how those things move down through the line, and how those things affect you as individuals out there, because in actual fact that effect and impact is much, much greater than you would first anticipate.
Well, that's the whole purpose of our site, isn't it? Basically to tell the people what the government refuses to tell them.
Exactly. That's right, and
We're
provide
not
that information.
Not conspiracy theorists at all. We actually get all the facts from EU documents, so it's perfectly factual, from recognised think tanks such as the Bruges Group and various trade organisations, and with references. Especially if you read the e-book, you'll find there's references to where the source of the information is from, so it's not conspiracy theory at all. And that's the sole purpose of our site, to inform people.
So I think where we are, we've talked through a number of things. We've shown that, that Clive has demonstrated that in actual fact there's a lot of hidden cost that is involved around green energy. Much of it tied towards treaty agreements and government subsidy things that make that not work as well as it should. We know right now that this whole political situation, political, social and economic situation that has unfolded in Ukraine goes all the way back to those trade agreements and the pull between Eurasian Union and the European Union. And of course, that's going to result now in tighter gas supplies, which are going to impact upon Germany for a start. We've got this situation that's taken place with Greece. Russia has negotiated with Greece now to put a new £2 billion pipeline in. So it's going to completely change the route of energy into Europe. And that's going to change the political motivation and the economic motivations across Europe as well. It's probably likely to strengthen the French position because there's a huge amount of ongoing power generation that's delivered from France. It's going to make things more difficult for Germany as a nation because their green policy has been very expensive and largely seems ineffective. So in summary, though, it seems that we do have more resources that we can exploit here in the UK. We've got independence with our gas. And of course, we've got this fracking industry that's going on here in the UK as well. And that's a very controversial topic. I'm not convinced by fracking. But what do you guys think about fracking? What's your position on fracking, Clive?
Well, my position on fracking is that I think it should be utilised. It's going to make us completely dependent on oil and gas. We're not going to have to import any at all, so we're not going to be at anyone's mercy. In fact, we can export it. It's going to give us massive employment, and it's going to make us a very rich country. We'd be able to industrialise the north again, because most of it is up in the north. So that would give them lots of employment up there. And I feel that once the public have been reassured that it is nowhere near as dangerous as the Green Party have implicated, I feel that people will be starting to relax a bit more, and they will see the benefits that fracking will bring to the country. And I feel that would then overshadow all the downsides to what people are hearing now.
Because most people don't understand how it's actually carried out, do they?
No, they don't.
Basically, it's like an oil well, but the drill is actually encased in a complete concrete tube all the way down.
Yes.
It's taken well below the water table, so there's no possibility of contamination. But the only downside is the possibility is the water. But then again, in Blackpool, where it's first mooted to be carried out, you've got the RSC there to supply all the water that we need. We don't need to touch any of our potable water at all. The chemicals will stay underground, again, way below the water level, so there's no possible chance of it contaminating the drinking water at all. I should imagine, I don't know enough about it, but I should imagine that the chemicals and sand and whatever there to pulverise the rock would stay in place and take the place of the very porous rock that's already there, and possibly be more stable than the rock that they're drilling from. What do you think, Clive?
Yes, I quite agree. And of course it'll have the added advantage of equalising more the wealth across the country, because as we all know, up north, it's the houses. You can buy a 3-bedroom house in Durham for £60,000.
Well, I'm in Liverpool for £1.
Yeah,
Anfield, yeah.
exactly. But I mean, it would certainly make it a much more even economy across the country, and I just feel it's got so many advantages that I can't see how we could possibly not do it.
Yeah. So let's test. Let's rather than so I have questions and queries about the science, but I'm not going to debate that here. But let's explore the social and economic benefits for a moment. So one of the things that happened with the development of North Sea oil, when we built all of those oil rigs, etc., under the Labour government and then into the government of Margaret Thatcher, you know, North Sea oil and its production was touted as going to make this country very rich, as you just said there, Clive, and it was going to make us energy independent for many, many years into the future. How do you both feel that those projects were managed, and do you feel that they delivered upon the early promises that were made about them?
They were mismanaged, I think. The oil was sold abroad. We didn't use it ourselves, did we? So when we started running short of oil, we had to import again. I just feel the whole thing was completely mismanaged, and I don't think there was obviously as much oil as was first anticipated. Whereas I believe that fracking, we've probably got 100, 200 years of oil and gas down there.
Yeah, what I heard actually was that the quality of the oil was so high from the North Sea that it would be a waste to use it for hydrocarbon fuels, and it was far better suited to chemical production, and that is why we sold it. But the biggest trouble, I think, is that unlike Norway, they developed a sovereign wealth fund and put the profits from their oil into a big piggy bank to look after. That's why Norwegians have such a high standard of living, because they invested the money properly. We haven't. It's been blown
tax
all over
credits.
the place.
I don't understand these benefits you get when you're out of work, when you're actually working, and it's costing this country billions and billions and billions, and I don't understand why it's been implemented.
Lobbies again.
I actually do agree with the Conservative government on the austerity measures on the benefits.
So let's think about exploring the fracking, the things that have taken place in the north of England, in Blackpool and stuff. And there are the country, as I understand it now, has been divided up into a number of different franchise areas, and these franchises are being sold to private independent corporations that are going to develop the fracking of these resources. So doesn't that look to you guys like a very similar situation to the Hinkley C reactor that I spoke about a moment ago?
It's no different to the North Sea oil, is it? That's all run by private companies, and they pay a levy to the government.
Well,
it would be no difference.
But I think we just agreed, didn't we? I think we just largely agreed that the North Sea, the production of oil and energy from North Sea oil was mismanaged, that the wealth was badly distributed, that the resource was exploited inappropriately, and that largely the profit from it was lost. And so, as a benefit to the UK and UK people, that's not happened. Now, we have aside all the issues with fracking, it looks like fracking is going to do exactly the same thing from an economic and social economic point of view, and I don't even think we're well.
That was government mismanagement, wasn't it? It wasn't the oil per se.
But the government isn't even in a position to be able to do anything about about getting involved in the management or exploitation of that asset because of the EU illegal state aid directives that forbid the taxpayer and the Treasury from investing in it.
We're back to square one again.
So aren't we? So in actual fact, aren't we going to deplete this resource, and the profitability will end up going out to corporations and out to external companies? The resource will be depleted, and this will not turn into the economic wealth generator for the people that Clive talked about. What are your comments?
Well, if there's a levy on per barrel of oil that comes out of the ground, or per cubic meter of gas or whatever, of the cost to produce that, it won't affect the income to the government, will it? And there's no reason why legislation can't be passed that before they open up another field, they reinstate the original one.
Well, I think that depends. I mean, for example, if the investment in Hinkley C, right, they have to invest in the infrastructure and so on and so forth. The benefit to them is they sell the energy back to the grid. In this case, they're going to pay a levy for the energy that comes out of the ground. Now, do you think that if they sell that energy, that gas and oil, back to the UK public, that they are going to include that levy as part of their cost base and therefore charge appropriate for the fuel? Or do you think they're going to say, oh, well, accept that? They're not, are they? So that's going to be charged back to the company, to the country.
It's going to affect the unit cost, obviously. The same happens with OPEC. But the revenue to the country will be in the form of taxation per unit. So that will pretty much stay the same. We won't lose or gain anything from that. It will be an X number of pounds per barrel or per cubic meter of gas. Whatever it costs the companies to produce it, they're still going to have to pay that levy, irrespective of the cost to them to produce it. There's absolutely no reason that, unlike in Hinkley C, that the Chinese and the French can bugger off and leave the thing for us to clear up.
Yes.
There's a perfect situation here where we're going to have multiple wells, and new wells cannot be opened unless the old one is filled in and made safe. So that would certainly reduce the risk in that respect.
Yeah.
What do you
think, Clive?
And it would have a vast benefit to the infrastructure of the areas that are being worked as well. I'm sure there's going to be so many benefits, but I think Peter's right. I think that the country will benefit, but obviously the government will benefit as well. But don't we need to leave the EU before this could actually be a reality?
Very much so, yeah. Very much.
Well, I think now. Why do you say that we need to leave the EU to make this a reality, Clive?
I think we need to leave the EU for it to be a reality, because then we've got control of the situation without EU directives and without them interfering in our business, and we've then got the control which we wouldn't have if we was a member state. Because
you answered the question yourself, actually, Rick, when you said we couldn't open a deal up with the Norwegians for gas. That is the very reason why we've got to get out of the EU.
That's right.
We don't need them telling us how to make our own money.
But you see, the political message that comes from the government, from the pro-fracking aspects of the government, the political message sounds very much like Clive just discussed, which was that, the development of jobs, infrastructure development in technology, supporting technology, a whole reinvigoration of the north of the country, a reindustrialization of the north of the country, and that's absolutely right. That's the political
benefit,
spokesperson, political benefit.
Yeah.
But what we're not being told is that the underlying lack of control that we have, the fact that there can be no treasury, government, state investment, and I think it's very important that we need to get back to this notion that where government is concerned, government is the government is the spokesperson of the people. They're not two separate entities. They are one and the same thing. And a sovereign nation, the government is actually just the figurehead or the spokesperson for the demos, for the people of the country. Now, we don't have that right now, and we can explain why on our site, and we won't go into that. We'll save that for a different table talk. But by proxy, the problem we have is that we have much control and treaty obligation through the EU, which means that we can't even begin to approach exploiting this resource sensibly and appropriately because of all the legislative strangleholds. And on top of that, we also have the corporate involvement in that, which means that the investment would be, the profitability would be stripped out of it, and it would end up being mismanaged in a very similar way to BP. So we need to make sure that people considering utilizing this as a startup for UK, we need to make sure that people understand the implications of control, because that's really important.
Yeah, and that we maintain control. Rick, it's 5:10 almost. We've been on air for an hour and a half more.
Well, we lost about 20 minutes where we went offline. So, well,
Don't
do you know?
bore people, do we?
No, we don't. So why don't we, pass around for some closing comments, for your closing thoughts. So I'll give my closing comments and my closing thoughts on this issue, which is that there is a great deal more inference from the EU than one might think. It is definitely worth visiting our website and putting Ukraine into the website and see for yourself how much longer this crisis in Ukraine has been going on and just how deeply implicated European actions and EU actions are with it. There are opportunities in the energy market space, and there are also potential high risks. The most important thing that people need to do is make sure that you have a balance of information. Don't just listen to one source. My name is Rick Timmis, and I'm going to hand over to you, Clive, for your summary and comments, and then we'll pass over to Peter. Clive, what are your summary thoughts about energy, EU, and Ukraine?
Energy, I think people should be very wary of green energy. I feel that people should understand that the renewable obligation certificates, which I keep going on about, and you're very welcome to look it up on the internet, it's all on there, will explain to you why green energy is so expensive and why people love it. The investors love it because they're getting fantastic paybacks, particularly the wind farms. They're paying, the subsidies they're getting is immoral, and that is one of the reasons why our electricity is so high, which of course then reflects onto industry and our costs in industry. And that's what I'd like to say about green energy. I feel that the EU have got too much power and are still controlling our energy. What was you were saying? You sent us a little comment the other day about it actually being nationalised over the whole of Europe. That's a frightening aspect. That's another story, I suppose, for another day.
That is the third energy package system.
Yeah, don't like the sound of that at all. I can't see how it could possibly work, because as we were talking earlier about the frequencies, that France and Germany have got a different frequency to us. It's going to cause all kinds of problems, and I think the whole thing is a complete mess. But I think that's about all I've got to say, really. I think it's been quite an interesting evening. Thank you very much for having me along. I am getting more confident as we're sort of going along. I keep getting lost for words, I know, but I promise you I am getting more confident as we're going along.
We've all done that.
It's been a very, very interesting evening. Thank you very much for having me in on the conversation.
Yeah.
Clive,
sorry.
Go ahead, Peter. Please go ahead.
Yeah, what I've got to say is very quick. Basically, I think the whole situation with Russian gas and the EU is fraught with all sorts of problems. Not least, you cannot guarantee supply or sufficient for their needs. And we in the UK are pretty much self-sufficient, or can be made self-sufficient fairly easily. And the sooner we get away, because I mean, Clive just mentioned nationalisation of energy in the EU. That could happen. There's nothing to stop it if they decide to take it into their heads and say that, make a directive that all energy is the property, in the same way as they have with the fisheries, make it the property of the whole of the EU. We would lose our own sustainability. So the sooner we get away from the EU, the better, so that we can be self-sustaining and make our own deals with the likes of Norway. And that's not even to mention all the other trade we can get into. So that's all I've got to say on it. Let's get out of the EU as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, so we're going to stop the live broadcast in just a moment, but we will hang around and return back to the green room so that we can have a chat. So don't click your red buttons, folks. Clive and Peter, do hang around. But do remember to visit our website, theunituk.com. There is daily news articles that go up there, a plethora of research and articles. We get feeds from the European Parliament with all of their policy directives and information, vast amounts of information there that will keep you up to date. You can sign up for our newsletter there as well, which is a daily email newsletter. We'd like you very much to come and get involved with us on Google+, and we have a community, the Unit UK on Google+. You can find the links to that on our website as well. Come and get involved, comment on the stories there, give us your thoughts and opinions about what you think about these topics, and engage with us, because our government and our country, our democracy is our responsibility. That means everybody needs to play a part, and that means that you need to make sure that you're staying informed. So my name's been Rick Timmis. Joining me this evening has been Peter Brown, and of course our wonderful guest Clive Taylor-Scholl.
Could you make a mention of the ebook, Rick, before you go?
Yes, of course I can. Don't also forget that we have a free ebook that is available for you to download from the website. It's available as a PDF. Go to the website, unituk.com. You'll see it there on the right-hand side. Download that and distribute that. Take a read. Lots and lots of information with supported documents there. So we're really excited and pleased that we've been able to, under voluntary circumstances, maintain and keep the unituk.com going. It's only through your support, through you, the audience, and the public supporting us, visiting our website, making comments, getting involved, and letting us know that the work Peter and I have been doing is valued, is valuable, and that you want to see these things. We've revitalized this show, Table Talk, and we look to bring this to you again more frequently. And we'll have more guests, and hopefully Clive is going to join us and sit with us and join the group as we debate some of these topics and give you, the audience, much more information. So from me, go ahead, Peter.
We won't be bitterly disappointed if you make a small donation when you go to the website either.
No, we certainly wouldn't. That really helps pay for all of the server infrastructure and everything else that keeps all of this online. So from Peter Brown and Clive Taylor-Scholl, and from myself, Rick Timmis, for this Table Talk from the Unit UK, good night and God bless. We'll see you soon.